Today we're going to be talking about the skeletal system. The average adult human body has 206 bones, and as we grow up from a baby, some of your bones fuse together. For example, like babies have a soft spot in the back of their skull because their cranium is actually separated into two and it fuses together as you grow up. So you actually start with more bones and then they fuse into 206 in general. So these 206 bones are separated into the axial and appendicular skeleton. So we're going to look at an annotated version of the human skeleton and see where these two skeletons come into play. So the axial skeleton is this middle central part of your human body, and it begins with your skull, then goes down into your vertebrae column, including your sternum, as well as your ribs, and it also includes your clavicle, which are your collarbones here, and it ends at the bottom of your vertebrae column. So the function of the axial skeleton is to provide mostly as protection because your internal organs are all within your rib area here, and then your vertebrae supports your entire back, and then your skull protects your brain here. So that's the axial skeleton. As for the appendicular skeleton, it is a framework for limb attachment for all the rest of your bones. So everything that is extended outwards of the body and not part of the central core is part of the appendicular skeleton. So the appendicular skeleton, the main function is really to facilitate movement of the human body, whereas the main function of the axial skeleton is mostly for protection. Also, for the appendicular skeleton, we can see all of these points, and these points are attachment for limbs, but also for muscles, which is how your body moves. Yep. Okay, and then to go into depth about the main functions of the skeletal system as a whole, we're gonna start with movement, because without the skeletal system, there would be no structure to your body, and therefore you need your bones inside to support your muscles while they move. The second one is support. Looking at the really obvious example here is your vertebrae column, because without your vertebrae column, your entire backbone and your back would just collapse and there would be nothing holding you upright. So it really provides as a framework for both muscle and tissue attachment. Next one we have is storage. So your bones are actually made up of minerals, but they actually act as storage for calcium and phosphorus, and these minerals are really important for muscle contraction and nerve activity within your body. Sometimes these minerals are released from your bones into the blood to maintain mineral homeostasis, and also lipids, which are chemical energy reserves, are stored inside yellow bone marrow. Okay, and then we have protection. So as mentioned earlier, most of the protection is coming from the axial skeleton, where your cranium is protecting your brain and your ribs are protecting your internal organs as well as your heart. The other part is also just everything in the center of your body, like your lungs as well, is all encased by your ribs to minimize outside external damage. And then the last one I have here is production. So what I mean by production is the production of blood cells, because certain bones, as we'll see later, contain red and white blood cell producing bone marrow, and that actually gives your body the amount of blood cells you need to survive. Okay, and then the next part that is important about the skeletal system, and especially on identification, is the anatomical body position. So the anatomical body position occurs when a person is standing upright with their palms facing outwards, their feet parallel, and they're planted straight on the ground. Oh, that was not the laser pen. So this is important because in order to identify the relationship between different bones or muscles, the anatomical body position is kind of the standard that we hold ourselves to. So the main things and the main terms we need to know for the location of these bones and muscles, we'll start off with superior and inferior. So superior and inferior is pretty simple. Superior is just anything that's closer to the top of your head. For example, we know that the collarbone is the clavicle, therefore, let's put in another one. And your patella is your kneecap. And the clavicle is closer to my head than my kneecap is. Therefore, my clavicle is superior to my kneecap. And then in reverse, my patella is then inferior to my clavicle. So that's a simple one to remember. The second one that I would like to introduce is proximal and distal. This one is a little more tricky but we can also remember it as proximal is closer to the point of limb attachment. And when we think of closer to the point of limb attachment, it's almost always closer to the core of your body. So if I look at my arm over here, the point of limb attachment would be where my shoulder is, and then where my hand is the distal point, the part that's further away from the point of limb attachment. Therefore, my hand, which are my tarsals and metatarsals, are distal to my shoulder because they're further away. Or my shoulders are proximal to my hands. So one key thing to remember is that when we're describing the relationship between two structures, you always have to name the two, otherwise there is no relationship. Okay, the next one is medial and lateral. So if we were to draw a midline over the center of our body, medial just means closer to the midline. So this is my center of my body. And again, we could look at the same example with my arm. If my arms are in the anatomical body position, my hands are gonna be further away from the center of my body than my ribs, because my ribs are in the center of my body. Therefore, my ribs are medial to my hands. Or the other way around, my hands are lateral to my ribs. Okay, and then we have anterior and posterior. So in the anatomical body position, because we are standing upright and we're facing straight ahead, this separates our body into two clear dimensions, the front and the back. Anterior means closer to the front, and posterior means closer to the back. And one example of this is your scapula. So your scapula is your backbone, not your backbone, your shoulder blade. And that would be posterior because posterior is to the back. Your shoulder blade would be posterior to your sternum, which is here, right? So in reverse, your sternum is anterior to your scapula. Okay, and I think that is it. So we have superior, inferior, and we always remember these in pairs. Proximal and distal, medial and lateral, and anterior and posterior. And those are our anatomical body positions. And that is all for an introduction of the skeletal system.